Hello my friends! In today's video I would like to share with you a couple of tips for shooting with Sony Alpha cameras. These tips will be based on my long-term usage of Sony A7R III and Sony A6500, but these will mostly work on all mirrorless Sony Alpha cameras or even cameras from other manufacturers. My tip number one are two things that I recommend you to do right after you unbox your Sony camera. The first thing that I do is to install screen protector. Sony cameras don't have a rotating screen, which means that the screen is always exposed, so you might want to protect the screen by applying the screen protector. At the moment, I use screen protector made by JJC. It is a gloss screen protector made to let through as much light as possible. It is pretty thin at 0.3 mm and the installation is also pretty easy. Touch functionality of the display is also not affected by the screen protector, so that works fine. You may have also seen matte protector on my Sony A7R III, which is just Belkin matte iPad protector cut into pieces. It helps with reflections, but it also decreases the brightness and resolution that you actually see, so at the moment I intend to keep JJC screen protector on my A7R III. The other thing that I recommend you to do right after the unboxing is getting rid of those annoying triangles. I replaced those with Peak Design Anchors version 3. You might not want to use these on Sony A6000 series though, because they will wear out over the time on A6000 series, but I've been using the same pair on A7R III for about 7 months and there are no wear marks on these. For carrying the A7R III and A6500, I mostly use Peak Design Slide Light or Leash. My tip number 2 is to correctly set up the custom buttons. User interface on Sony cameras is probably one of the weaknesses of the whole system, so one way to fix or improve that is to use custom buttons as efficiently as possible. On my A7R III, I leave 3 marked buttons on the dial as they are, so those control the drive mode, display options and ISO. I use lower button for metering mode and center button for focus area. I use C1 button for white balance and C2 button for autofocus mode. I change picture profiles a lot when switching from stills to video, so I use C3 button for that. I use C4 button for turning touch controls on and off. I don't use auto exposure lock function much, so I have reprogrammed that to autofocus. You can also switch the functionality of the button depending on whether you are in stills mode or video mode. When I am in video mode, I use left arrow button for clear image zoom instead of dry mode settings, which are of course useless in video. My tip number 3 is to set up quick menu or function menu and my menu tab. As I have said, the menu on Sony cameras is not great, so you might want to minimize the time that you spend navigating through menu. Unlike with function buttons, it is not possible to set separate function menu for stills and video. Fortunately, there are 12 customizable options, and I use those for both stills and video functions. Here you can see my settings, so feel free to pause the video if you would like similar setup. It is similar with my menu, but here you can assign more functions, including that video resolution and frame rate, as well as video autofocus settings and other important features that cannot be accessed outside of the menu. Tip number 2 has to do with raw processing and saving time while editing, which I achieve by using smart AI features in Luminar 3 and Aurora HDR, which is in my opinion an interesting alternative to Lightroom. A7R III, A7R Mark III and other new Sony cameras produce great raw files, and I am constantly getting good results using just Accent AI filter and AI Sky Enhancer sliders. This takes just a couple of seconds, but there are of course some very advanced features and filters that you can use in a creative way. I have made a couple of videos about Luminar and I will link them in the description. Tip number 5 has to do with video, and it is about my favorite picture profile to shoot video. Like many other Sony shooters, I use picture profile 8 with gamma change to Cine 4. With these settings, you are also using Sony's newest processing and color science. It is not as flag as lock, and in my experience it is usable in majority of situations, including low light. You can also use it from ISO 200, so you won't have to use dense filters on bright days. Color grading this footage using Luminar in Premiere Pro is pretty easy. I have made a separate video about that. You basically just need to increase the saturation to about 140, move the curve a bit, and set the sharpness to about 12. Then you can fine-tune it, for example, by using new HSL panel, and that's it. Some people also use hybrid log gamma profiles, but personally I only recommend doing so if you intend to export the video in HDR. For SDR there are better options, but I will make a separate video about that. If you shoot 4K video, especially with Sony A6300 or A6500, you may have encountered problems with rolling shutter, which distorts vertical lines. This is actually pretty easy to fix in Premiere Pro using an effect called rolling shutter repair. You just need to apply the effect on the clip and set it to 100%. Downside is that exporting clips with this effect applied will take up to 10 times longer depending on your editing machine. So that was my tip number 6. Another tip related to video is to try all autofocus modes. Some of the users are complaining that autofocus is too jumpy or even too fast on Sony cameras. That can actually be easily fixed by setting dry mode speed and autofocus track sense. If you want very smooth autofocus, just set the dry speed to slow. Tip number 8 is using clear image zoom and APS-C mode. Clear image zoom is basically digital cropping of the sensor, so it enables you to zoom digitally in video while still getting full 4K resolution. APS-C or Super 35 mode works similarly, but it is also available for stills, and it just crops the sensor to APS-C size, which enables you to use APS-C lenses on full frame cameras. This is especially useful on Sony A7R Mark II and Mark III, because these still have plenty of resolution in APS-C mode. On A7 Mark III it significantly decreases image quality and the pictures are quite soft, so I only recommend using it for special purposes. Tip number 9 is for those who are switching from DSLRs, and it is not to get stuck with adapted lenses for too long unless you are using some specific lenses or vintage lenses. Using Canon lenses with adapter is good for transition period, but having full functionality and especially native autofocus is in my opinion the proper way to use any mirrorless camera. One exception might be using Sigma MC11 adapter with compatible Sigma lenses where the communication is really good and all of the functions including autofocus work as well. Other than that, I recommend always using native lenses. Tip number 10 is to get accessories that will enable you to get most of your Sony Alpha camera. My most favorite way to carry the camera are Peak Design straps, and I mostly use Slide Light in ash color. Regarding the SD cards, I use SanDisk Extreme Pro UHS-1 and UHS-2 cards, and these have never failed me. UHS-2 cards are probably worth it if you shoot sports or wildlife for faster buffer clearing in 3rd generation A7 Mark III and A9 cameras. A7 Mark III or A6000 series don't come with included charger, so I recommend getting one of these USB dual chargers which work very well, and I will link one in the description. If you use larger lenses on A6000 series, I definitely recommend getting L bracket, which improves the grip. I have also made a video about my most favorite accessories for A7 Mark III and A6500, and it will be linked in the description. If you shoot a lot of video, you might also want to consider building a rig around your Sony camera. This greatly increases capabilities of your Sony camera, and it makes using it for serious filmmaking much easier. For me, the two most important parts of the rig are the cage and monitor. I use SmallRig cages because these are very well made and fairly affordable. These make you able to mount other accessories and also protect your camera. Especially if you have A6300 or A6500 where the screen dims in 4K video, I recommend trying external monitor because that makes a huge difference while shooting video. At the moment I use Feelworld MA6, I have made a video review of this monitor and it will also be linked in the description. So these were my tips for using Sony Alpha cameras. I will be more than happy to read your tips in the comments. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.